You see, I always think about something. I always think like, what if the world's most powerful nations were forced to answer one particular question? Do you owe Africa and the black diaspora a debt? Because right now at the United Nations, that question is no longer theoretical. His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, the President of Ghana, has stepped into the global stage with a bold demand. The Transatlantic Slave Trade
must be recognized as the greatest crime against humanity. As the African champion on reparations, Ghana intends to introduce a motion in this August body to that effect. More than 12.5 million Africans were forcibly taken against their will and transported to create wealth for the powerful Western nations. We must demand reparations for the enslavement of our people and the colonization of our land that resulted in the theft of our natural resources, as well as the looting of artifacts and other items of cultural heritage that have yet to be returned in total. We recognize the value of our land and the value of our lives, as did our colonizers, as well as the governments that happily paid reparations to former slave owners as compensation for the loss of their property, in quotes, and that property for which they received compensation was paid referred to enslaved people who had been freed.
In fact, the greatest crime, and he states reparations must follow. This is not just a speech, this is a challenge to global power. Just stay with me a little longer as we dive deep into this very video and make you understand better. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if this is the very first time you're coming across my channel, Inside Studios Network, make it a point to hit that subscribe button, like the video, share the video, go to the comment section and let me know what you think about this very conversation that we are having. To my new viewers and my returnees, thank you so much. But please look at that subscribe button. Thank you. Yes, hit that subscribe button, like the video, share the video. Thank you so much. And to my subscribers, I really appreciate you. You're loved. Thank you for being with me since day one. Now let's get straight into the conversation. Like I said earlier, President John Dramani Mahama has stepped forward to the entire world. He has taken the world stage, asking the world and all people concerned to formally recognize the transatlantic slave trade as the greatest crime against humanity, and therefore reparations must follow. And when he said this, a lot of people and a lot of groups, a lot of countries have thrown their support. But America and Europe, on the other hand, have decided to take the opposite direction.
Ghana has already attracted wide global backing for its landmark resolution, which will be represented at the United Nations on Wednesday, and will call for the transatlantic slave trade to be formally recognized as a crime against humanity. President John Mahama, who serves as the African Union's champion for reparations, is leading the initiative. Who supports and who opposes the resolution? The 54-member African Union, CARICOM, and Brazil are among the key supporters. The U.S. Congressional Black Caucus, the global group of experts on reparations, and several civil society groups have also declared their backing. But both Europe and the United States are expected to vote against the resolution, a stance which Ghana has strongly criticized.
It is unfortunate that our friends in the EU and the US have served notice that they will not be voting for this resolution. But the good news is that we are far more than that. And we want to be on the side of justice, on the right side of history, and we want healing and closure in a way that is dignified.
What does the resolution demand? The proposal calls for formal acknowledgement of the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity, official apologies and financial reparations, citing the enduring economic and social consequences of slavery. Why is Ghana leading this campaign? Ghana is home to several historic slave forts and has positioned itself as a central voice for accountability and historical justice. The African Union has also extended its reparations agenda through 2036, further elevating Ghana's leadership role.
So now let's watch this video, and when we are done watching this video, we'll have a short conversation.
The plight of about more than 12.5 million men, women, and children whose homes, communities, names, families, hopes, dreams, futures, and lives were stolen from them over the course of 400 years. I speak these words today not only for Ghana, but also in solidarity with the rest of Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, and the wider diaspora, and indeed, all people of good conscience throughout the world. This resolution is a pathway to healing and reparative justice. This resolution is a safeguard against forgetting. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, violence begins with language. When words are weaponized or to codify abuse, when people are called out of their names, regardless of their state of dress, when slaves were captured, they were always stripped of their clothing while being kept in the dungeons of the fortresses that had been built on the African coast by the European traders. They were forced with their limbs chained and shackled into the hold of cargo ships. They remained naked, packed like sardines during the month-long journey through the Middle Passage. Not all those who were loaded onto the ships survived the voyage. A number of the ships sank with their entire human cargo. Others who fell sick were thrown overboard. And a few who preferred death to captivity voluntarily jumped overboard. It is believed that 10 to 20% of enslaved people died in the Middle Passage. Whenever a ship arrived at its destination, the enslaved people, still naked, were taken to the market where they were inspected and appraised like livestock. They were then placed on an auction block in front of an audience of potential buyers and sold to the highest bidder. Once they arrived on the plantation where they would work and live for a lifetime, they were also stripped of their names. And so you were no longer Fatu, or Kofi, or Bubakar, or Nanayao, or Emenka, Nayong, or Hamisu. You were given names like Ben, Jemima, John, Toby, or Mary. In addition to these new names, they were also called girl or boy, regardless of how old you were. And maybe I should also say that filthy N-word. If you ever needed a surname, it would be that of your master. And sometimes they were branded like cattle with the plantation's insignia or logo. There were sugar plantations. There were also coffee, cotton, tobacco, and cocoa plantations in the Caribbean and the Americas. South America had diamond and gold mines as well. And also the production of indigo took place in Jamaica. The people who were enslaved labored on those plantations from sunrise to sunset. And the conditions under which they worked were brutal. They were beaten occasionally to the point of death. They were underfed. They were kept in cramped quarters and often died young, if not from labor, then from disease. There are even records of some enslaved women who were kept as breeders. Let's not mince words, ladies and gentlemen. Business was booming because when labor is free, profit margins are huge. African lives were disposable. If too many of the enslaved Africans died, more were captured from their homes on the continent, enslaved and trafficked. During conversations about slavery, The point at which euphemisms are introduced, and there's a rush to talk about abolition. But we cannot afford to look away. This is precisely the part when we should pay close attention, because the devil is in the detail. And I'm going to share 4 trafficking destinations with you. Remember, when you hear these numbers, that it's not about data. These are about human beings and human lives. Roughly 6 million enslaved Africans were trafficked to Brazil, which is the 5th largest nation in the world, stretching 4,400 kilometers from north to south and 4,320 kilometers from east to west. Almost 2 million enslaved Africans were trafficked to Jamaica, which was the most profitable of all sugar-producing locations. Jamaica is 235 kilometers long and between 34 and 84 kilometers wide, depending on which point you are located. About 500,000 enslaved Africans were trafficked to America from the early 17th century, when the first ship arrived, to the 19th century, when chattel slavery was eventually abolished. America grew from 3 colonies to an independent nation with 36 states. Over 450,000 enslaved Africans were trafficked to Barbados, an island that is 34 kilometers wide and 34 kilometers long and 23 kilometers wide. Before the trafficking of enslaved Africans, plantation labor in Barbados came from white indentured servants who were usually Irish. There were 2 major problems with indentured servants. One was that they eventually had to be granted their freedom. And the other was that if they ran away, catching them proved challenging because they blended in, they were white. In 1661, Barbados enacted a code for the enslaved. And in the preamble, it said, Negroes are described as, and I quote, a heathenish, brutish, and uncertain, dangerous kind of people, quotations closed. It goes on to explain that this is why there must be a set of laws detailing how they should be punished. Clause 2 of the same code details what to do if any Negro man or woman shall offer any violence to any Christian, as by striking or the like. And it goes on to say that if it is a first offense, the Negro should be severely whipped by the constable. However, if it is the Negro's second offense, he shall be severely whipped, his nose slit, and be burned in the face. The code gave owners and overseers the ability to torture, maim, and even kill enslaved Africans with impunity. And became something of a template for the rest of the Anglo-Atlantic world. In 1662, a year after Barbados enacted this code, a legal doctrine was established to set judicial precedent in the American colony of Virginia. It was titled Partus Sequitur Ventrum, for those of you who understand Latin, which translates from Latin as, what is born follows the womb. This legal framework ensured that all children born of enslaved women would also automatically be enslaved regardless of who the father was. And it is important to note that many enslaved women were impregnated because they were raped by the plantation owners or their overseers. But what this law did, even in cases where a baby was not the product of rape, was to strip the child of its paternity in the eyes of the law. That child, as an enslaved person, was property that could be given or sold at its owner's whim. The doctrine was adopted throughout the Americas, including in Brazil. People will sometimes try to put a disclaimer on slavery by insisting that you cannot use the social norms of today to judge the actions and events that took place in the past. Well, such people are loud and wrong. Just because everybody is doing something doesn't make it right. Slavery is wrong now, and it was wrong then. For as long as Africans have been trafficked and enslaved, there have been abolitionists who have spoken up against it. The first slave ship landed in America in 1619. Opposition to chattel slavery was voiced and mentioned in passing in documents. But in 1688, the Germantown Friends, a group of Quakers, put out a formal written protest against slavery. And in it they wrote, and let me quote, "Now, though they are black, we cannot conceive there is more liberty to have them slaves as it is to have other white ones. There's a saying that we shall do to all men like as we would have done to ourselves, making no difference of what generation, descent, or color they are." Quotations close. Your Excellencies, erasure begins with language. When words are used as a sleight of hand to gaslight, to trick you into doubting what you know to be true. It is when words are used to create mythology. When they are spoken, the volume gradually decreases with each repetition until it becomes a full verbal reduction. The legendary American jazz player Miles Davis said, and I quote, "It's not the notes you play, it's the notes you don't play." When it comes to the contributions that Africa has made to enriching Europe and building the so-called New World, the silence is deafening. We have paved roads through mountains, we've put down railroad tracks, we've constructed buildings, laying brick after brick. We have cut sugar, cane, we've picked cocoa and cotton, we've descended into mines to unearth precious metals and stones, and we have wet-nursed babies. We've paid the price of admission with the blood of our ancestors, and still what greets us at the door is silence. What we're met with is mythology. And I'll explain what mythology I mean. In 2015, McGraw-Hill Education, one of the largest publishers in the United States, released a geography textbook that is used in over 1,000 school districts in Texas. The book stated that millions of workers were brought from Africa to work on agricultural plantations. It said workers, not slaves. A family complained, and the book was pulled off the shelves. But now there's another one. There's a US organization called PragerU. I hope I got the pronunciation right, PragerU or PragerU. On the organization's website, it's described as the world's leading conservative nonprofit that is focused on changing minds through the creative use of digital media. Now look what they did. They created animated videos which are used as supplemental educational material in public school classrooms in 11 states. And in one video, they used a young boy and his teenage sister. And this young boy and his teenage sister are confused about why some people celebrate Columbus Day and others celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. This organization uses a time travel app. And this young teenager and his sister find themselves on a ship with Christopher Columbus, who tells them all about how the Carib people, the indigenous people of the Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean, were violent and uncivilized cannibals. The children then ask him to explain why he'd enslaved people, To that, Christopher Columbus is said to have responded, "Slavery is as old as time, and it has taken place in every corner of the world," normalization. And he says, "Being taken as a slave is better than being killed." No, I don't see the problem. Columbus then accuses the children of coming to his time and trying to judge him by the standards of their time. In another animated video, the same brother and sister use the same time travel app and find themselves in the year 1852, standing in front of Frederick Douglass. And he tells them that he is working to abolish slavery, a system in which people make other people work for long hours with no pay. The sad fact, he explains, is that slavery has existed everywhere in the world for thousands of years. Here in the United States, Black history courses are being removed from school curricula. Schools are being mandated to stop teaching students about the truth of slavery, segregation, and racism in American history courses. Books about those topics are being banned in schools and public libraries. Museums, art centers, and other institutions whose budgets rely in any way on public funds are being prohibited from scheduling exhibitions and programs or from displaying materials promoting racial awareness or Black history. Much like the law that was put in place to regulate the punishment of the enslaved in Barbados, these policies are becoming a template for other governments as well as some private institutions. At the very least, they are slowly normalizing the erasure. They are slowly normalizing erasure. Earlier, when discussing the importance of this resolution, I said it was a safeguard against forgetting. This is the type of forgetting that I was referring to. But there are other types of forgetting as well. The great Jamaican philosopher-poet Robert Nesta Marley famously said, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." I want to repeat an encouragement that I offered as part of this address, one that is companion to the truth that I began with. When discussing slavery and its resulting institutions and practices, we must always start by reclaiming racial equality, the dignity of Africans, the humanity of our ancestors who were enslaved, and as a matter of course, our own humanity. We must also remember to reclaim our humanity, because when we absorb too much of the language of violence and erasure, we can stop hearing the language of truth that exists within us. When we're in that state of mind, our minds become enslaved. In his book, the Guyanese writer Walter Rodney quotes a Dutch traveler's first impressions upon visiting the Nigerian city of Benin. He says, "The towns seem very great. When you enter into it, you go into a great broad street. The town is composed of 30 main streets, very straight, 120 feet wide. The houses are close to one another, arranged in very good order. These people are in no way inferior to the Dutch as regards cleanliness." This was his quotation. In 1531, a Portuguese sailor, Vicente Pegado, traveled to the city of Great Zimbabwe, and this was what he wrote. He said, "Among the gold mines and the inland plains between the Limpopo and Zambezi River is a fortress built of stone of marvelous size, and there appears to be no mortar joining the stones. This edifice is almost surrounded by hills, upon which are others resembling it in the fashioning of stone and the absence of mortar. And one of them is a tower more than 12 fathoms high." A 2016 article in the Guardian newspaper highlighted the city of Great Zimbabwe, built between the 11th and 14th century. And the article described a centuries-old drainage system that remained operational, funneling water from the houses and enclosures down into the valley. And the article also disclosed how, in the 19th century, European visitors to this abandoned medieval city in Great Zimbabwe refused to believe that indigenous Africans could have built such an extensive network of monuments. Here's the thing. The greatness that is within us will always outweigh the injustices that have been visited against us. Despite what we've been through for centuries, our survival is a testament to that fact. In closing, I would like to offer this quote by Nelson Mandela. And he says, "Our human compassion binds us the one to the other, not in pity or patronizing, but as human beings who have learned how to turn our common suffering into hope for the future. Truth begins with language." Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, tomorrow we vote on a historic resolution that will be another step in the journey of establishing truth. We stand united as Africans, whether on the continent or any part of the world, and link up with people of conscience around the world to seek truth and justice and restore the dignity and humanity of victims of the slave trade. This is a resolution of destiny. And I hope all of you will vote tomorrow to establish truth so that together we can pass this historic resolution and finally acknowledge the full horrors of these transgressions against humanity of the approximately 15 million human beings who were enslaved. I thank you very much for your attention.
All right, now let's get to it. Now let's have a short conversation. You see, His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama's argument is rooted on international law and moral accountability. The transatlantic slave trade forcibly displaced over 12 million people, a lot of Africans, destroyed societies and built massive wealth in Europe and the Americas. Yet, here is the key issue. While slavery is universally condemned today, it has never been formally recognized by the UN as a crime against humanity retroactively in a way that triggers reparations. And that is why President John Dramani Mahama is doing this, and that changes everything. Because once something is legally recognized as a crime against humanity, it opens the door to claims, compensations, and accountability. You see, this is not just Ghana speaking. There is a growing global alignment. All African nations, the 54 African nations are supporting. The CARICOM representing the Caribbean states. Brazil, a country with one of the largest African descendants population. And the Congressional Black Caucus, the United Nations' own permanent forum on people of African descent, and the Global Reparations Advocacy Group. This is becoming a coalition of the historically affected, not just Africa, not just the Caribbean, but the entire African diaspora. Now, here is the thing. Whilst a lot of groups and a lot of nations are supporting, the United States and several European nations are expected to oppose or avoid this motion. Why? Because the implications are enormous. Financial reparations could reach trillions of dollars. Legal precedents could trigger waves of claims. Political accountability could reshape global narratives. But beyond money, there is something deeper. Admitting legal responsibility for historical crimes. That is not just anything common. That is identity, legacy, and power. And this is bigger than a UN vote. This is about rewriting how history is treated in global system. For decades, the consequences of slavery has been discussed socially, but rarely addressed legally and structurally. President John Dramani Mahama's push is different. It forces the world to move from "we regret it" to "we are accountable for it." And that shift could redefine global justice forever. So now the interesting thing is, it is not Is this conversation going to happen? In fact, it has happened. So what we should be thinking about is how far will it go? Will the world acknowledge this as a crime deserving reparations, or will it remain another chapter of history without closure? Let me ask you a simple question. Do you think reparations should happen? And if yes, what should they look like? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below and let us have a real respectful conversation. Thank you so much for joining me throughout this episode until now. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Make it a point to hit the subscribe button, like the video, share the video, go to the comment section and let me know what you think about this very conversation. Like I've said and I'm saying again, the story of Africa is being rewritten, and don't let us write it without you. This was Inside Studios Network, and I'm gone.